Hi everyone, welcome to Yachting International Radio. I have Isia with us today from Sydney, and Isia works at a correctional facility, and he's joining me today to talk about a very interesting topic, and that's the us versus them culture, as well as men and mental health. So welcome. It's so lovely to connect.
Hello, Karine. How are you?
Good, thank you. So we go way back, I think maybe even 5 years ago. We met on a mental health first training course, and that was fascinating. It exposed me to a side of corrections that I've never seen before. To see, I don't know if you remember, but there was a correctional officer working within the Department of Justice, and he had lost his son to suicide, and he just broke down crying as he shared his story that with regards to another inmate who there was a situation of abuse occurring, and it just reverted him back to losing his son and what that felt like to be unsupported perhaps, and the idea of that particular offender was the same age as his son, and it could have been his son, and to be treated with the treatment that he would have rather have given. There was a discrepancy basically. So I thought that was so lovely that he had the courage to be vulnerability within our training.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's not often that you get to see correctional officers in general to be more open about their emotions, particularly moments of trauma or moments where that brings them down to the lower steps of their inner person. And it's not something you get to see often, particularly in corrections.
No. And I know that because working as a service and programs officer and delivering treatment programs, it was so difficult to be able to create that climate of safety so that they could be vulnerable, because not only are they men talking about their feelings, but they're dealing with a jail culture, and that culture, excuse my language, is harden the fuck up. Like, you can't be weak, and weak, like, emotion for them, and I think men in general, the stigma attached to that is that showing your emotion is a sign of weakness, and you can't be weak in jail. So
yeah, I agree with you. I would say since working in corrections, I definitely have built up a thick skin, and I quote. Obviously, there would have been a lot of moments where it can be quite difficult. But growing up in a culture, even before growing up, where you've been taught to build up these defenses, and then coming to this job where you have to build up more defenses, doesn't really give me an opportunity to explore the other avenues of being open about my own emotions. So it does make it difficult for me to learn more about my own feelings, or identifying those feelings when I feel agitated or sad. And you can definitely see that in a lot of the officers, but also a lot of the inmates that are incarcerated as well.
So how do you deal with those difficult emotions?
Well, given a lot of the time, I do a lot of self-reflection, of course, and being a peer support officer has opened up a lot of other opportunities for me to explore other avenues, such as practicing mindfulness or meditation, which I'm slowly trying to get used to. Yoga, which is quite unusual for me, but I found that quite relaxing itself. But also trying to utilize all of my support systems. So my wife, my work colleagues that I trust, and also the professional services that are available, like your GP, EAPS, all of the phone lines. So I think there's a men's health line, Beyond Blue. So there's a variety of other opportunities out there. It's just a matter of having that chance to explore and trying to learn more about myself as a person and how that affects everyone else.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And just on the pure fact that when the crew are working on board, and I don't know if you know too much about the industry, but they live and they work together.
Yeah.
And it's 24/7. I was explaining this to someone the other day. It's not like you have an issue with someone at work and there's a bit of tension and you can go home to your partner, have a glass of wine, defuse and reset, as you said, reflect, process, and then start the new day the following day. You're just in each other's face all the time. And with the isolation and thinking, when is this going to end, for those who are stuck on board, it's really challenging. However, it's so warming to know. I've recently had more male clients reach out for help, and they are expressing the same things like, look, I do yoga and I'm meditating. And it just makes me so happy to see that men are starting to step up and have the courage to reach out for help.
I totally agree. And with my own team, especially at work, I always try and endorse those similar systems and services available to them, because even though they may appear um, pretty staunch, or have a lot of their defenses and appear okay, at least if they have a moment to themselves and think about whether they need help, at least they can access that and they know that it's available to them.
Mm, mm. Okay, so are you collectively talking about it, like, or is it still behind closed doors?
Um, it's depending on the conversation. Obviously, I do try um, when we have our debriefs or briefings in the mornings. We always generally have this informal conversation about our day, how we're all going, what's going on outside home. But I always come with the um, line with, "Are you okay? Is there something that we all can do to help you?"
Mm,
um, and trying to incorporate into the conversation to normalize it rather than making it something for a specific private time. Because if I make it as normal as I can as part of the conversation, at least they know that they can talk about it rather than um, having having second thoughts or doubts whether they can or cannot do it.
yes, and that's so important.
Mm.
So going back to the culture, the green versus the blue, how would you describe that? So obviously in the States it's orange. I'm not too sure the officers' uniform. So what we mean by that is that there are the officers in blue and then the offenders or the inmates in green. And there is a very palatable divide between the two, usually, most commonly. And then you've got the people like myself, the service programs officers, that are kind of in the middle or the gateway between the two. And it's so challenging to trying to break down those barriers. And I think for the objective of rehabilitation is to have a holistic, seamless approach to how we treat the offenders and how we support them in their recovery and their release so that they don't return. Because obviously it's a huge expense to the taxpayers' money. I think it's like 90,000 a year from when I last looked to house one offender. But yeah, how does one, because even in the yachting industry, there is that rank and there is a divide and there is an abuse of power. How would one manage that in the best way possible? I know it's not perfect, like it's a culture that takes years and years to change, but how do you address or how do you work within that environment?
It's very difficult. In my experience, of course, there'll be people who see that divide between the blue and green. But that all depends on the particular correctional facility you go to and the type of people or staff that work in that particular facility. At the moment, I see the divide becoming a lot more blurred now we're looking at rehabilitative processes and trying to understand the underlying criminogenic factors to the individual and how we can address them. And I generally find a lot of the people I work with these days are addressing their behaviors as if they're trying to treat them as if they're their own children, or people who need that extra support. So what I mean in a way is that when I work as a correctional officer in there, I will be like the best role model for them,
Mm,
because I'll display a lot of the appropriate behaviors. And then if they see that and they see how I operate as an officer or a compliant citizen, hopefully they'll see that in themselves to follow those same examples. And if they do get out, hopefully they'll follow those same examples as citizens rather than as those incarcerated.
mm,
And generally, a lot of the conversations I have with a lot of staff, they understand why um, a lot of the problems that a lot of the inmates come out with, whether they're angry or sad, they understand because a lot of them, the staff have also experienced it themselves. The only difference is how they cope with that situation.
true.
And obviously, a lot of the staff are able to cope with it, but a lot of the people that are incarcerated don't, because they don't know
Mm,
what's available, what they can use, who they can talk to. And generally, that's a lot of it a lot of the time.
mm,
But I definitely do see that divide getting better,
mhm,
because a lot of the staff see that divide obviously cause a lot of issues, and um, a lot of the staff want to make the work environment more positive than negative.
mm, mm. Okay, and now have you personally, I'm just interested to see whether an offender's approached you and opened up to you.
Yeah, it has happened on
Yeah,
occasion.
that's amazing. That's
It's interesting. Oh yeah, it's definitely interesting because when you become a person that's approachable, obviously, then some inmates obviously will come to you and have a chat. Um, there was a moment where an inmate wanted to talk to me about what he wants to do when he gets out of jail,
mm,
and he wanted to be a youth worker.
mm,
So, and he had no idea how to approach it, where to start, and basically, I just gave him what I know, like um, basic examples of appropriate behaviors. And surprisingly, because he was incarcerated, he's been through quite a lot of trauma, a lot of problems in his life. He can use that as a means to share his story to
mm,
other people similar to himself.
yeah.
Whereas for myself, I had a really good upbringing. I had two very lovely parents who looked after me, a great family. I was quite fortunate. I went and had an education, went to university, and obviously ended up with a stable career.
Yeah.
Whereas someone of his past, where he's been through quite a lot, he would have a better understanding of why a lot of these people would have these problems, and he would have, I don't know, probably better understanding of how to address it.
Yes. Okay. So, what would your advice be to deal with resistance to change?
Don't do it all at once, because if you go in hard with change, then obviously there'll be a large amount of resistance to that change. One of my mentors spoke to me about change and how to approach it, and she said to do small tweaks. It doesn't have to be big, but it has to be small tweaks, because small tweaks, they're not as noticeable. But over time, as people get used to those tweaks, they'll become used to that normal behavior and they'll accept it. But gradually, over time, it doesn't have to be an overnight solution. It may take months, years, even, but
Mm,
eventually you'll get that individual or group of people over that line. And eventually, a lot of those people will understand why these changes happen and see the positive effects of it.
mm,
And it's a very complex thing to deal with when it comes to dealing with change, particularly a whole group of people if they're so used to something for such a long time.
yes.
And it's a matter of just trying to slowly work with every single individual slowly, change their mindset, change their behavior, and eventually, hopefully, in the end, that they all accept it, and then that's where you achieve that positive change.
Mm, great words. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Now, there was another one I wanted to ask you a question. So, in terms of you implementing these changes, like talking about mental health and checking in with your colleagues, has have you had any backlash as a result of that?
Um, yeah, I would say that people set up their defenses straight away. Um, back when I think of backlash, I think of something. It's a more aggressive approach
Passive
um,
aggressive?
to that change. Sorry, yeah, aggressive. That's what I imagine backlash would be.
Yeah, but something I'm thinking more passive aggressive, like side
Uh,
comments or put,
I get a lot of the I'm okay. I'm fine. I don't care kind of mentality.
yeah,
Um, but generally, maybe that's because they're in front of other individuals and they don't want to see the more softer side of them, obviously.
yeah,
Um, so there's no one solution to every problem.
yeah,
So you definitely need to identify how best to approach each individual and then
yeah,
modify each time you have those conversations with different people. But yeah, I definitely have come across a lot of moments where I'll get resistance.
yes,
But generally, I try not to pry too much into that. I rather let them have control over the situation and eventually try and empower them to slowly work their way to a position where they'll have those conversations with me. Because
yes.
if you go in too hard, then obviously you'll never achieve what you want to do.
No, and people close up, and that's why I don't know if you've had that training, the motivational interviewing. I'm sure you would have.
Uh, is there motivational interactions?
Probably it's probably the same. They just
Yeah,
keep the name, but
yeah.
I would say so.
It was such a long time ago.
But I loved it, and that's why I think I loved working with the offenders and their resistance, because every time I get like a little segue in where an opening where they would be somewhat interested, I'm like, yes. And obviously my job is to get them to do as many programs as possible, and they
Mm.
so resistant. They're like, no, I've had enough of this shit, I'm not doing another program. And at the end of it, I like get them to sign up to like 6. They're like, oh, how did I do that? Why did you, you know, you tricked me. I said, no, I didn't. It's to do with rolling with the resistance. And I think that's what you're trying to say, is that don't push the individual too hard.
Yeah.
Just gently challenge them, but being compassionate at the same time.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah.
I totally agree because I don't think a lot of them experience compassion. A lot of them experience obviously a lot of anger,
Yeah.
obviously, but
Yeah.
they never experience the more softer side of humanity, really.
Yes. And there's a expectation of um, how they are going to be treated, I think, in the
Mm.
facility. So as soon as you get a different approach than what you're expecting, it's almost a shock. And it's like, well, how do I deal with this? I'm not used to this. And they're very much routine driven. So anything against that routine is very distressing or uncomfortable for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Now tell me about this, the mental health movement that you're involved with, men and mental
So, so as a peer support officer, or the workplace offered anyone who's willing to put their hand up to share their story for Men's Mental Health Week. Obviously, I put my hand up for it because I feel I have a story to share. A lot of my previous experiences as an individual has changed a great deal, particularly in regards to my own mental health. And a lot of the stigma around men's mental health, or whether that's appropriate to have those conversations, really came into light because a lot of moments in my life so far have basically come to the forefront and has challenged my understanding of mental health and how important it is that we all have these conversations and focus a great deal on our mental well-being.
Mm.
Because if you don't look after number one, then how are you able to go to work or support your family or do the things that you want to enjoy in life if you can't do that? And a
Yeah.
lot of people forget that. They will rather put other people first before themselves.
Yes. I used to be like that.
Same here.
And it's a hard lesson to learn. And I always thought it was selfish to put,
Mm,
yourself first. And then someone had to teach me that it wasn't. And now
yeah,
I get it. And that's, I love the analogy that the flight attendants, well, they use in this to describe this sort of situation is, when they do their safety check on the airplanes, and it's about, look, you have to put your own mask on, oxygen mask, before your child or the person next to you, because how are you supposed to help someone if you're dead?
yeah.
Yeah, so it's so true.
And we do forget that.
Yeah.
We do forget that a lot. And particularly when it comes to our mental health, we do forget about those small things that make a big difference.
Yes.
And with the culture, it's, well, for me, it kind of sucks really, because there would have been a lot of moments where I could have easily said no, but I said yes, and then ended up down a pathway of, you know, anxiety or depression or anger, and where
Mm,
I could have easily said no in the first place.
yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I did a course the other day on suicide, and
Mm,
the guy who works for Movember, he is a clinical psychologist, and he was going through men and mental health and the signs, and he says, like, you think it's what you're seeing is men just being men, so the common um, signs that you would see would be aggression, frustration, anger, alcohol abuse, and drug abuse. And you might just think, oh no, but that's what guys do. But it's like the warning signs that there's something else underlying there that's going on.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
And a lot of those signs, I recognize those looking back at my previous experience. Minus the drug use. Obviously, I never used drugs, but I definitely have experience of all the other symptoms as well.
Mm.
Um, but now, much older and wiser, I definitely use those symptoms with a lot of people I work with or my friends, and then try and take that time to say what's actually going on. Because, yeah, as much as we ourselves think that we're okay, but generally sometimes we're not. And it's quite helpful to have people on the outside to acknowledge those symptoms and be able to address it for you
Yes.
if you can't do it yourself.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Gosh, I'm so happy we've had this conversation. And to be honest, when I met you like 5 years ago, I thought you were very inspiring, and it's exactly what the Department of Justice needed and our correctional facilities needed. And as I said before chatting, I see you as a thought leader, and to have worked with you for a little bit on the Youth Professional Network on the steering committee. I don't know if
Mm.
you were did you help out with the Amazing Race?
Yes,
Yes.
we have two amazing races so far.
Oh, how did the other one go?
The other one went really well, although a lot of the comments about the race was 5 kilometers was a bit too far, but they did enjoy the challenges.
I thought it was brilliant. I loved organizing that through the city of Sydney and through the museums. It was so much fun. It was such a good
It,
club as well.
it's a good challenge because it's very complex, because you're definitely looking at whatever location you set it up and then trying to make sure there's challenges that are relevant to the particular location. So obviously at the time you did Sydney, And the one that we did at the time now, recently, was Parramatta.
Ah,
Mm.
okay. Yeah. I mean, also a good aspect of that challenge is to get people to work together as a team and
Oh, yes.
communication skills, all of that.
Yeah.
It's
And it was good. It was a great networking opportunity for everyone, and to explore how big and diverse
yeah.
our agencies are.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's brilliant. Well,
Mm.
thank you so much, Isaiah, for joining me on Yachting International Radio and sharing your wisdom with us. It's truly amazing.
I'm always happy to share my wisdom and always happy to have a chat.